So let's talk about Moss motors. Now I've been debating about making this video for probably well over a year now. Finally decided it's time to make it. Now Moss seems to be one of those companies that is a favorite punching bag of a lot of British car owners online. Now, the fact that they are the single largest supplier of parts naturally puts a big old target on their back for criticism. And while I definitely understand some of the criticism they receive, I also believe that a lot of it simply is not warranted. So I think the majority of the people that are probably criticizing them are just average Joe owners of the cars. They have 1, 2 cars maybe, and are just maintaining those cars, but maybe not getting really deep into them. And they're not mechanics, or shade tree mechanics maybe, but they don't know the industry that well, and they don't know how difficult it is for companies like that to really keep this hobby supplied. Now myself, I think I'm kind of uniquely qualified to at least give a whole lot more insight than, say, the average Joe. So I've been connected to at least the auto repair industry since my earliest memories as a little child. My dad had a shop working on mostly daily drivers, doing both mechanical and body work. So I was hanging around that shop all the time. And then of course, I've always worked on my own stuff since my very first car. My very first car I bought with a blown engine, put an engine in it, did some other work to it, and kept it going. And then I joined the Army and was a mechanic in the Army for a little while. I've also worked behind the parts counter 2 different times. Once in the early 90s after coming back from Desert Storm, and then also just about 3 or 4 years ago, I was working behind a parts counter as a break from working on cars as a business when I was having a bit of burnout from running my own business and taking care of my dad's estate. And then I've also been working as my own business here, working on these things for roughly 20 years. But I also worked in manufacturing for a while. Not manufacturing car parts, but manufacturing. So that's a lot more insight than, say, the average guy just playing around with these things. Now, to preface this, I want to say that as of the making of this video, right now, Moss in no way is supporting me and this channel or connected to me in any other way other than that I have been a distributor for them for roughly 20 years. So when I first got into this business, I looked at my options as basically just being Victoria British or Moss Motors as my primary parts supplier. Now, of course, there was other companies out there like Roaster Factory and Angle Imports, and I think British Parts Northwest was in business by then. But you know, like Angle and the Roaster Factory and stuff, they weren't as big. They didn't have as much, either didn't have as much coverage in parts and models, or they didn't have as good of a catalog or website or something that I could work with to really look the stuff up. So it really came down to Moss and Victoria British, and I chose Moss back then to become a dealer. And that was basically because they had such good coverage for a lot more part numbers and more models, but also because they had better support. When you call up Moss, at least the people that you deal with generally are somewhat knowledgeable about the cars you're dealing with. Not always, but what they try to hire. And even then, sometimes you're talking to people who used to be in the business, like me, who maybe retired or stopped working on cars and went to work for them. That definitely does happen. But when you called Victoria British, Victoria British was just a small part of a much larger company, much larger than Moss. They were part of LMC Truck before Moss bought them out. And when you called them, you were basically just calling a call center. They didn't really know much about the cars you're working on or the parts you were trying to get, and they couldn't answer that many questions for you. I actually know some people who called them up for parts and asking the difference between parts at different price levels, and they literally couldn't tell them what the difference was. So you didn't get much customer support, but also they were such a big company that was such a small part of their company that they were really selling parts by price, and they were selling the cheaper stuff. If there was 2 parts available of different quality levels, they usually only carried the cheaper part, where Moss would at least carry both. And you have to realize that for these cars, that there's not that much available as far as different manufacturers making them. How many manufacturers are going to be making any individual part on this car? Maybe 2 companies. It's just too small of a market. You're not going to have a large market here, and we'll get into that later. But Moss at least tried to offer the better parts, at least as an upgrade, where oftentimes Victoria British didn't offer anything else, just the one part. While I say, competition is good, competition in the way they were competing with each other often is actually more of a race to the bottom than it is keeping prices in check. Because you got a big company trying to go off volume and price, and a smaller company that can't do quite the same volume. Every time Moss tried to compete with them on price, they had to lower their quality if there was a cheaper part available to stay in line with pricing with Victoria British. And I have bought from Victoria British here and there over the years, and quite frankly, I was never very impressed by what I got from them. It was usually, if Moss didn't stock it and they did, when I would get the part, they wasn't very good quality. One of the parts Moss never ever stocked was the corners of the floors here, they call the heel board extension on the Bs, but Victoria British did, and I ordered them one time, and it was such bad quality part. Fit so horribly that I just made patterns and made them myself from then on. And that's why Moss didn't stock them, because they didn't believe that the parts quality was good enough to put in stock. Now, of course, things have changed over the years. Manufacturing in today's world is different than it was 20, 25 years ago. A lot different. We have to kind of keep that in mind these days. Automotive manufacturing is a volume business. These are not volume cars. These, like the MGB here, was considered one of the most successful of the British sports cars, selling nearly 700,000 cars over 18 years. That was considered a huge success. And of course, the Mini sold a lot more than that, and the Morris Minor, but those weren't as common here in the US where I'm at. These were, and still are today. That is considered a high volume for them at the time. Today, that's barely a boutique business. And to give you an example of the kind of scale I'm really talking about is, you remember the Dodge Dart that came out, I don't know what, 10 years ago, whatever it was, the new Dodge Dart. That was considered for the business today to be an absolute failure. Actually an embarrassment, because they only sold roughly 1.2 million cars over a 3-year production run, far eclipsing anything that the British market ever did in these things. I mean, these were something like 36 or 38,000 in the biggest year ever. But that's the kind of volume that you got to deal with to get the quality high and the price low. Now back to the competition between the different companies. I've seen it for many years now, been 20 years in the business, that every time somebody comes out with a cheap part, and say Moss has a better part, all of a sudden they can't sell that part. Like the gas tanks, Heritage gas tanks, they used to sell those, but they were like, what, $300 or something like that at the time? But they were built off the factory stampings. The full factory thickness gauge of metal, all the baffling in them, everything that you needed it to be, and it fit exactly like it was supposed to, just like the factory tank. And then the Spectre come out with that cheaper tank that was all galvanized, and everybody went crazy for those things because they were $130. They were selling the crap out of them things. I don't think Moss was able to sell any tanks after that, and they had to give in to the market pressure and start selling the Spectre tank because they couldn't sell the Heritages anymore. The problem with the Spectre tank is it was made out of thinner gauge material. Yes, it was galvanized, so you wouldn't have to necessarily even paint it, where the Heritage tank was only in E-coat, but the Spectre tank also didn't have any baffling in it. Now, I specifically sought out a Heritage tank for my car back then and was lucky enough to find one that was damaged slightly that I was able to get a decent price on. But in a sports car, you want that baffling, because without that baffling, and you dive into a corner really hard and you're anywhere near the limits of the handling of the car, and all that gasoline just starts sloshing to one side because there's no baffling to slow it down, it can throw the handling off on your car and could actually make you go into a slide and wreck your car. With the Heritage tank, the handling is going to be just like it was from the factory. Not to mention that there was also some quality control issues on the Spectre tanks over the years. They weren't real common, but sometimes you would get the seam weld around wouldn't quite fully seal and it'd leak fuel, or you'd put the sending unit in and try to lock it down and one of the welds would pop on the ring, something like that, where you didn't get that with the Heritage tanks. But, you know, that's quality versus price. And that's been this whole industry since the 80s, as far back as I can remember. You got to remember that aftermarket parts will never fit the way that factory parts will. And there are no factory parts anymore for these cars. They're all aftermarket. The closest you can get to factory is the Heritage stuff because it's made on all the factory jigs. And even then, the steel that you're making them out of is different today. So when you buy a fender or a rocker panel, the spring back when they stamp them might be different than the original stampings were because the steel has changed over the years. The metallurgy's changed. But I always recommend, if you're gonna buy body panels, buy the Heritage. Don't buy the aftermarket, because it takes a lot of work to make aftermarket panels fit, and it always has. Ever since the very first aftermarket panel I ever bought back in the 90s for an S10, fender wouldn't fit worth a crap. And you had to work it. You had to spend time to make it fit. No different today. But the other problem, the other thing we got to think about here is it's not just a British car problem. This is an industry-wide issue with quality control these days. I don't care what kind of car you're working on. It could be a 2000 something Buick, or it could be an MGB. The parts quality, so much stuff is coming out of China to keep the prices where people can afford them, that the quality's not there. And really the aftermarket stuff's been like that for years. It's not just Chinese parts, because it was Taiwan before that, and it was Japan before that, and India somewhere in there too. It's always been that way because companies are always looking for ways and places they can send the parts to have them made a little bit cheaper than what we can make them for here in America or in England. And to go along with that is, for years now, I mean, every forum I ever go on, it's always people, where is the cheapest place I can buy XYZ part? I'm not going to pay Moss's price, or I'm not going to whatever. Where's the cheapest place I can buy it? Well then, if everybody's looking for the cheapest part they can find, then what you end up with is cheap parts. It's a race to the bottom, like I said. If people aren't buying the more expensive parts, then we don't have any good parts. They don't exist anymore because they go out of production because they're not selling enough. Because volume, it's all about volume. And think about any single part on this car. What could possibly be the volume that they would sell of any one of these parts in any 1 year? And what manufacturer outside of China is going to even take that on? Very few. And since they're buying it from China, quality control is, and always has been and always will be, a problem. And it doesn't matter what you're working on. It could be a Chrysler product, a Chevy, an MG, it doesn't matter. There is videos all over YouTube of people complaining about the current quality control problems across every make and model of car that exists, even into the newer stuff. If it's not coming from the factory, there's problems with it. And even if it's coming from the factory, but it's an older model car, there's usually still problems with it. I just watched a video the other day of a guy with a 2000 and something Buick. He was the third shop to work on it. He diagnosed the problem, went and bought the part, put it on, didn't fix the problem. Part's bad out of the box. He said, doesn't matter where he buys it from. Doesn't matter where he's buying it at a discount store, buying it at Napa, or buying it even from GM, the possibility of that part coming out of that box being bad is pretty high these days. And he was just frustrated, saying, you know, it's so hard to work on cars these days. We are losing mechanics left and right all over the country for every car model, every level you can think of. People are getting out of the business because it's so hard to keep up with the parts quality. We spend so much time dealing with ill-fitting parts and parts that fail, and we can't charge the time to do it. Then the parts fail and we look like idiots because, well, you didn't fix my car, or, oh, it was only fixed for 3 months and broke again. That is a real thing right now everywhere, not just these. So back to Moss. Moss, without them, we would be lost. This industry would be so difficult. It'd be so hard to keep our cars running because they are driving the market. Without them, we probably wouldn't even have half the parts that we currently have available to us. So we should be appreciative of the fact that they even exist, even if we're not happy with the quality of the parts sometimes, or you don't think you got good customer service one day or something. I mean, as far as customer service is going, you know, you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar. If you get on the phone, ranting and raving and being a jerk, you're probably not going to get as good a customer service from them or anybody else out there. That ship, I think, has sailed because of all the Karens in the last 20 years. People just don't want to deal with it anymore. And you're not going to get that kind of service. It doesn't make people snap to attention and just take care of you. I see it all the time at the VA. I go to the VA, guys come in there ranting and raving and bitching and moaning, and then they have a terrible experience. But if you go in there and you talk to them pretty nicely and you give them the benefit of the doubt up front and see how it goes, you usually have a good experience, and it's fine. You know, it's just as good as going anywhere else. Same thing with dealing with Moss. Give them the benefit of the doubt when you first get on the phone with them, talk to them nicely, let them try to take care of the problem, whatever the problem is. And if they can't solve it to your satisfaction, okay, then get a little more gruff with them. But some people just start out gruff. And those are the people that usually have customer service problems most of the places they go, not just with Moss. I mean, and you got to take into account that anybody can have a bad day. You'll never know what kind of day the person on the other side of the phone has been having. You might be upset about your car, but maybe maybe they got some serious things going on in them and they're just barely keeping it together to be nice to you. You'd never know. It doesn't matter what company you're dealing with. That could be a thing. These days we need to learn how to just be nicer to each other and give people more of the benefit of the doubt and, you know, not go off on people so quickly and so easily. Moss is trying. They have a very difficult job to do, supplying parts for us on this, because everybody wants low prices and high quality, and you just can't do that with the volume. So they're dealing with Chinese companies for just about everything anymore, because it's the only place they can get them made. I mean, if they tried to make any one of these parts in England, they couldn't put them in stock for the price that the vast majority of people are willing to pay retail. And they still would have to pay for their overhead and profits and everything. So, yeah. And you know, I think Moss also has a research and development department. There's a lot of parts that exist today only because Moss developed them. They went through the process of making it happen to develop it and get somebody to manufacture them for them. And I see online all the time people saying, no, don't go buy from Moss, go buy from so-and-so or over here or over there. Well, where do you think that part's coming from? I would say probably 80% of these parts only exist from one manufacturer to start with. So whether you buy it from Moss or you buy it from one of the other suppliers, it's likely to be the same part coming from the same manufacturer. And that's actually even industry-wide with a lot of other brands out there. So just because you go somewhere else, you may not get a better quality part. You might pay more, but you probably get the same part in the box because, you know, how many choices do they have to get them manufactured by? Now that said, there are companies that have worked to try to find stuff that Moss doesn't have, or to find small suppliers for rubber parts or whatever that is actually better than what Moss is currently carrying, and that changes all the time. This is a constantly evolving market. Moss is constantly, non-stop chasing its tail and trying to keep quality up, trying to keep parts in stock. It's a non-stop thing for them. When you're contracting from China, you get a part put together, you get yourself the prototype, everything's perfect, it all looks good, your rubber's the quality it's supposed to be, everything's in spec, get your first production run, everything looks good. Somewhere along the way, these companies will oftentimes try to slip something by you and cheapen up the rubber, or things will go out of spec, or they'll try to put cheaper metallurgy or something and try to slide it by. And of course, people complain, well, Moss doesn't have enough quality control people. If they had more quality control people, if they had enough quality control people to catch everything, then everybody would be complaining about price, because everything would cost 20, 25% more in order to have enough staff to catch everything. It's a balance. And it's a balance they're walking a very thin line trying to make that balance work. So when they do catch a problem, manufacturers cheapen up a piece of rubber or something else, then they got to go back, and they have fairly little actual recourse, because all companies in China are at least partially state-owned. So if you're going to try to sue them for something, you're suing the government, and you're not going to get anywhere. So your only shot is to just return all the parts, try to get them remade, or move to another manufacturer. And it's a constant round robin, a constant chasing of all this stuff. They, behind the scenes, work a hell of a lot harder than most people realize just to keep parts on the shelves so they can keep selling them to us and keep our hobby alive. Now, of course, if they were to want to work with me and support me in some way on the channel, I would absolutely be open to talking to them about it for something in the future. But as of right now, nothing.